advocates, students. So it's going really well. And last 1 month, a surprise event for me was a top corporate law firm. They are saying that we want to introduce spirituality in our corporate firm. And I did a webinar for them, and it has become so successful. Now it is spreading a lot. Of course, 3 years back, when I wrote a mail to Professor Peter Gabel, he was the one who gave a big punch to me. He said, no, you should do it. You should not give up this, because in my system, there is no regular course like this, spirituality to be introduced in legal education, because we have a regulatory body which deals with legal education. There is no scope for that. But in my university, my vice chancellor and my board of studies, they said, no, you can go ahead. That time only I wrote to the Spice Lab, and Professor Peter Gabel wrote to me continuously, and he guided me a lot. And now I am so happy, so fulfilled that I'm getting a lot of students, judges, public prosecutors. They are talking to me in terms of spirituality in legal profession, legal education, research, and so on. It is going on.
Doctor, would you be brave enough to give me your email address? I'd like to.
Yes.
I have a fledgling attempt to teach some spirituality to law students here, and it's very interesting. And I happen to believe that most people from India have a much deeper spiritual orientation than Westerners, and I would like to learn from you if you'll give me your email address.
Yes, certainly. I would be very happy. In fact, this year, this July to December, I was about to be in USA. 3 universities had invited me. One was Emory, Georgia, where the law and religion studies group is there, center is there.
Yes.
Next one was Fordham, New York, and the third was Minnesota School. These
well,
3 schools.
I'm teaching at the Minnesota school, so maybe we can have you come by Zoom. So give me your email address.
I will message you here in the chat box.
Okay, thank you.
Because it's slightly a little complicated. It should not misspelled.
Okay, thank you.
And welcome everyone who are signing in. We're just saying hello for the moment and just giving folks a few more minutes to gather, and we'll do introductions when that happens.
And if I can share in between, next year, I have got all the approvals done for starting a full-fledged Center for Excellence on Spirituality, Law and Justice. So I am going to invite all of you for that. And I'm going to introduce a new journal under Scopus. And I'm also going to do a series of publications. So I would be very happy, privileged, and honored if you all contribute articles, or if you are in the board of studies for that. We all can develop that, and I humbly request all of you to be a part of this and guide youngsters from this side. I would be very grateful to all of you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good
Yes.
work. Good work, Dr. Param.
Yes. Your book, I am very fascinated, the politics of the seeing, other seeing. But the problem is the book got lost in the library on the other side, and the whole COVID situation, everything stopped. And
Right.
meanwhile, the government of India had appointed me to deal with Auroville International, which is one of the, Auroville International Township that deals with applying spirituality in social and political governance to bring human unity.
I read about it,
So,
and you
yeah.
wrote about it.
Yeah, I am currently in the governing board, assisting them in framing policies.
Mhm.
So last 1 year, it has given me practical understanding of implementing spirituality in legal policies.
Wonderful.
It's so nice. So nice it is.
Very good. Now,
One
now-
day,
Sorry.
if I get a chance some other time later, if you could give me an invitation, I would like to present what I am doing here to all of you.
Oh, yes. You will have a chance to do that, Dr. Param, of course.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Welcome everyone who's signing in. I think we probably have a critical mass now, and perhaps others will join us as time goes on. So very good to have everyone. Very good for our PISLAP community to be together at this moment and to share our thoughts, reflections, passions, commitment, specifically at this moment to combating racial injustice, to fostering healing and community, and to being a real presence at this time. So we're really delighted to have a talk today shared with us by Bruce Peterson. Hello?
I'm here. It's Ann, come back. You're audible here.
Sorry.
That's all right. So we're delighted to have Bruce Peterson, Ann Friedman, and Ross Brockway speaking with us today about child support, and they'll frame the conversation. But before we get there, we traditionally start our calls with each person sharing your name, where you are physically in time and space, just sort of locating ourselves together. And Peter usually leads that. So Peter, I'll turn it over to you if that's okay.
I will just lead everyone should speak in a couple of sentences so it doesn't take too much time. So I'm Peter Gable. I'm in San Francisco, California, and I'm sitting in my son is now 24. I'm sitting and he's gone, but I'm sitting in his room, which we've kept as it is, with pictures of my parents, his grandparents on the wall. Dr. Param, 2 sentences.
Yeah, I am Dr. Param from Gujarat National Law University. I am from west of India. I am currently sitting in my house, and my house is quarantined very happily. There are cops waiting outside. They don't allow anyone to go inside or come outside or go outside. Nothing is happening. So last 2 months, we are just in this 2 room, me and my wife, we are sitting, reading, enjoying, and giving webinars. And this PISLAP gave me a great chance to interact with all of you. Great.
Thank you. Wonderful. Maitreya.
Hi, I'm Maitreya Badami. I'm in Chico, California. I am teaching in the Legal Studies program at Chico State University.
And what do you say something about the room you're in? What do you say?
I am in my bed. I'm on my bed. It's covers pulled up behind me in my bedroom in Chico, overhearing my 12-year-old son's television show in the next room and mediating a dispute between a cat and a dog.
Perfect. Thank you. Bruce Peterson.
I'm Bruce Peterson. I'm a recently retired judge in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I'm in my home office.
Great. Thanks, Bruce. Duncan Holloman, good to see you. Where are you? What's
So I am, excuse me, I'm in Cambridge, Massachusetts, sitting in my my apartment, and I am a lawyer.
Ann Friedman, maybe you can't hear.
I unmuted myself. I could hear you, couldn't hear me.
Okay.
Finally. I'm Ann Friedman. I teach at Rutgers Law School in the Camden campus. I'm sitting in my study and I'm looking out on what looks like an absolutely gorgeous day, except that it's 90, so no reason to be outside in it. Glad to be in the air conditioning.
Wonderful. Welcome. Carolyn Gallagher.
Hi, everyone. I'm Caroline. I'm a law student at Rutgers Law, and I am sitting in my dining room looking at some china.
Good to have you, Carolyn.
Thank you.
Ross Brockway. Ross Brockway, can you unmute yourself and speak to us? I think I'll come back to Ross then. Kim Vanderheiden.
I am an artist and I'm sitting in my art studio that's in my home in Castro Valley, California.
Thank you. And Kim is an artist of justice. Ross, you want to try again?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't hear you before. My computer is having some internet issues. But my name is Ross Brockway, and I'm in Atlanta, Georgia, here in my apartment. And it's a cloudy day, but I'm excited to be on this call with y'all.
Okay, thanks, Ross. Stu Webb.
Yeah, Stu Webb, Minneapolis, in the lockdown apartments, and retired collaborative lawyer, and glad to be a part of it.
Glad to have you. VL Chase, tell me your name and where you are.
Hi, I'm Victoria Chase. I am in Haddonfield, New Jersey, sitting in my dining room, which also doubles as my husband's Philadelphia sports memorabilia room.
Wonderful to have you. And that looks like Perry Sedman, although the name says J. Sam Diaz. So
yeah, well, Nanette has co-opted my name, so you can call me Nanette Shore if you wish. I'm a retired IP lawyer. I'm currently in Washington, D.C. in my dining room, and my intent is to take a field trip this afternoon down to Black Lives Matter Plaza in downtown Washington, so I can, you know, hold a finger up to President, what's his name, along with our beloved mayor, who has probably done the most significant thing in her entire career by having 16th Street painted Black Lives Matter.
Yeah.
In my humble opinion.
Thank you, Perry. Great. Sylvia Clute.
Yes, so I'm Sylvia Clute. I'm in my home in Richmond, Virginia, and I am in over my head preparing to do my first online teaching of restorative justice and unitive justice at Virginia Commonwealth University beginning next week.
Fabulous. Good luck. And let me see who's next. Alpita Shaw.
Yes. So my name is Alpita Shaw. I'm a practicing lawyer in Chicago, Illinois. I'm in my home office, which is also my dining room. But my background is Joshua Tree, which is kind of where I'd like to be. And I'm also a yoga teacher and in a 2-year mindfulness meditation teacher training program. Good to be with you.
Great to have you. And Rand Rosenblatt. Rand, I have you, not your visual, and I have you muted, so I will come back to you if you appear. Who is calling? Oh, go ahead, Rand, welcome.
Yeah. Can you get my visual up? I don't know how to do that.
There's click on where it says video, there's probably a line through it. Just click on it.
I'll look for it later. So I'm Rand
Lower left.
Rosenblatt. I'm a retired constitutional law teacher. I'm in my home office in Philadelphia, across the hall from Ann Friedman, my wife.
Great to have you, Rand. Good to see you again. And someone has called in from 814-571-7827.
That's me. Hi, this is Jill Engel, and I am in State College, Pennsylvania, where I'm on the faculty at Penn State Law, and I am on my back deck, and it is an achingly gorgeous day. So I'm very grateful.
Good to have you, Jill. Good to hear your voice as well. And that would be nice to see your face, but good to have your voice as the second choice. Okay, is there anybody who has not checked in? Maybe Nanette, you could be the last. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. It's wonderful to be here with all of you and coming at the end, hearing everyone. Perry, I renamed you myself to me and you to Perry. So sorry about that. Perry and I share a Zoom account, so hi slap. I am here in my home and apartment in New York City in Queens, and gratefully starting to come out of the pandemic, and I work as a lawyer and supervisor at Bronx Legal Services representing low-income community.
Wonderful. Okay, back to you, Nanette, to lead the next phase.
Yes. Well, I'm mainly going to just turn this over to a wonderful trio of presenters, Bruce Peterson, Ann Friedman, and Ross Brockway, each bringing their own lens to the work of child support reform, which is very much on the cutting edge of racial justice and is a very, very timely subject for our current moment. So without further, I'll turn it over to them. They'll present to us their work, and then we'll have time for questions and answers and dialogue. So turning it over now and putting myself on mute.
Thanks, Nanette. So I'm Bruce. We decided I would go first. We're each going to take 10 minutes so that we allow some time for you all to chime in. I know from this group, people have lots of ideas and personal experiences. So we hope you'll think about your questions and comments, and we'll get to them shortly. So I have worked a lot in the child support system, both as a judge and with low-income fathers before I went on the bench 20 years ago. Our PISLAP group talked about whether we should change our call today to something more explicitly addressing the George Floyd tragedy, which is here in Minneapolis. It's very much on our minds. But actually, child support is a good thing to talk about because, like a lot of systems, like the healthcare system and the education system, the intentions are good. But because systems like that are sort of cookie cutter approaches, mechanistic approaches, based on middle-class values, which are largely based on white experiences, they perpetuate the injustices and racial inequities that are very much a part of our society. And child support's a good example. So I suppose some of you had very different understandings of the child support system, but the federal government funds local child support collection efforts in order to encourage states to recoup the investment of public assistance given to low-income mothers with children. So the idea is to establish paternity for the fathers, collect the child support, and use all or a good part of it to recoup the public investment in public assistance. So we have a family court here, and about 10 years ago, I was the presiding judge. And we were very unhappy with this system because, very frankly, it was just blatantly apparently, with great apparent, inequitable and unfair. About 3/4 of the people in it were African American. We'd have large calendars. There's no longer any doubt if someone is the father because there's testing for anybody who wants it. So we would have very 2-minute hearings with people, large numbers of people, and say, congratulations, you're the father of this child, here's your child support amount. And there was very little recognition of the history of the couple, of their future together, of the contributions the father was making. The only thing that counted was a child support number that that person was obligated to pay every month. That system works very well for employed middle-class parents, where there's a paycheck that can just have withholding applied to it, and a monthly payment goes to the mother. But it was very ineffective in our circumstances and totally did not acknowledge the other contributions that many fathers make to their children. So we put together a working group, which for 2 years, actually it was really fun because people were really interested. Everybody knew this process was bad. We put together a working group and thought very creatively. In fact, it got larger and larger. More and more people wanted to join. Eventually, there were 20 or 25 people of us meeting every couple of weeks, talking about what we would like to see. And we put together what we thought would be a non-coercive, positive approach to child support and to co-parenting. And I'm going to go through this very quickly. I could spend an hour on each one of these elements and have in the past, but we're going to keep to the basics here. We put together several steps that we thought were essential. The parents would meet with, we called it co-parent court, based on our very positive experience here with things like drug court and veterans court. The parents would meet with me to start with, be shown a video of parents and their situation. have an intake assessment with our case navigators. We hired some very professional, young, street smart people, street smart professionals, an intake assessment about what their personal situation was and what their needs were. They'd be referred to a series of co-parenting workshops, not parenting workshops, but co-parent, how to work together, conflict resolution, communication, the different contributions of mothers and fathers. The University of Minnesota Extension Service put this together for us, tailored for our population. We initially started with 6 2-hour sessions. Eventually, to reduce the burdens, we reduced it to 4 3-hour sessions. We also recognize that you can't be a good parent if you don't have health care or a place to live or enough food. So we put together a social support system separately for mothers and fathers, and offered parents assistance with their basic necessities of life. At the end of the education process, our staff people would work with the parents to produce a parenting plan. We wanted them to think about their work together as parents, what their respective contributions were, what their future would be like, how they'd communicate. We put together a very user-friendly parenting plan model with check the boxes and pictures and fill in the blanks. Then they'd come back to me and I'd sign it and make it an official court order that was their parenting plan for their future together. A couple other wrinkles. We spent a lot of time, we were very concerned about domestic violence at every step of the process. We had access to domestic violence advocates and education about domestic violence. We had mediation for people who needed assistance with working things out together. By the way, the mothers and fathers, we got good advice, had separate tracks because we found that people spoke much more candidly and openly with people in their more similar situation. And then the couple came together at the end of the process. Let me just see if I've missed in my quick recitation here. So that was co-parent court, and it was very successful. I had 2 fears in embarking on this. One is that people would blow us off. This is a very skeptical population. They're used to coercion. They're used to unfriendly government programs. We really worked with that. At every step of the way, we were supportive, we were friendly. We offered all the sorts of things you need to get people to participate: transportation, childcare, food at every meeting, lots of personal follow-up. And in the end, we had, I'm trying to look here, I think the astounding rate was, we had 67% of people complete the program. With anybody who works with programs with this transient and sometimes chaotic population, remember, these are all mothers who are receiving public assistance and the fathers of the children of those mothers. I was also worried that we would just foment conflict, that we would bring people together who didn't like each other. These were people who had not been able to agree on what we call a recognition of parenting themselves, had to have a court order that the father was the parent. I thought we would foment conflict. We had some domestic violence issues that came up. We made referrals. They were very infrequent. People, by and large, welcomed this program. They wanted to work together. We found lots of receptivity by mothers to fathers who wanted to step up and got the help with employment and other things to do so. And of this population of low-income unmarried parents who were not able to agree even that the father was the father, we had 54%. I'm talking about a 3-year period where this was rigorously evaluated by the University of Minnesota in a control group study. 54% completed a parenting plan, which was vastly more than you couldn't get. There were probably 20 issues in this parenting plan. My wife and I have been married for 30 years. I don't think we could agree on 30 issues or 20 issues about each other. So there were increases in child support. The parents were very happy with it. It was a very holistic, nurturing kind of. It's like a lot. We're talking in Minneapolis a lot about the police department now. Can we get along without a police department? Well, the police department is coercive. These coercive systems kind of perpetuate themselves because you have to add more power to make coercion work. But we found that encouraging people, supporting them was a much better way to accomplish the same thing. I want to close by just saying one thing. The evaluation showed just what you expect. The fathers felt empowered. They felt greatly optimistic. The mothers reported much more father involvement in the child's lives. The child support amounts were modest increases, but they were significant. Here's a quote I like. One of our graduates wrote to us, said, "I want to thank you guys. Co-parent court changed my life. It changed everything for me. Without this program, my life would be very different." And he told us that co-parent court helped him become the dad he always wanted to be. And he wanted to go through the classes again with the child of his with the mother of his youngest child, because they were so helpful. So I will stop at this point and ask Ross to pick it up here. Ross and Ann have had very interested and very different experiences with the child support system, and we're going to get kind of a 360-degree view here. Ross, you're on mute.
Thanks, Bruce. And thanks for talking about that. I think that's so cool to hear a co-parenting court that really involves both parents and treats it as a family thing, and that seeks to restore and heal relationships. That's really an anomaly in the child support system and in the court system, as a lot of you probably know. And so I want to maybe talk about what maybe the norm is, but keep thinking about Bruce's alternative, because I think that's in many cases what we want to see implemented around the country and the world. But I want to start just big picture with the police killings of Black Americans and the protests happening in the United States and around the world. I was at a protest yesterday where a speaker made a really good point that I wanted to share with you. Essentially, it was that the violence of the courtroom reflects and is in many ways a direct cause of the violence that happens on the streets, police against people of color. And the speaker went on to say, that's because we don't hold police accountable. And that's true. But deeper than that, I think more than that, the violence that we see as lawyers or as courtroom lawyers in the court teaches police officers, teaches prosecutors about how people of color and poor people should be viewed. The symbols in the courtroom and the treatment of people in the courtroom frames the entire legal system to look at Black people and people of color and poor people as objects, or as problems, as threats, as sort of animals to be controlled, rather than humans worthy of dignity and voice. So, for example, I've been representing some protesters who've been arrested at protests in Atlanta. And when I was there on Friday, I represented maybe the third or fourth college student who'd been arrested, and the judge said to the prosecutor in the whole room, I don't know, I didn't realize we were arresting college students just for protesting and violating curfew. Is it 7 minutes after the curfew, they're arresting, is that what we're doing? We're just arresting college students? And the prosecutor didn't say anything. Just, no, we're seeking a $1,000 bond. And the judge said, okay, and moved on. And there was no recognition other than that very small comment. There was no real reckoning in that courtroom of how truly unjust and insane a system is, and a courtroom practice is, where people who are just trying to speak out and make their world and their community better are instead put behind a cage where they spend a day or more in jail. for being on the street speaking. And of course, they're mainly Black people. They're mainly people of color, young people, and they're poor. But that happens every day. And those symbols and that treatment, that ordinary embedded racism that exists in the criminal legal system leads to police violence, and it leads to racial injustice in countless ways. Child support system is one of those ways, and it's important because it's insidious. It's important because we don't pay attention to it. Most people don't know about it. People don't talk about child support. When people do think about child support, it's usually in a way that sort of like gives a bad taste in the back of your mouth, right? And you think about stereotypes, maybe like deadbeat dads, and how do we hold people accountable and be better parents? But when you look at this in the context of the criminal legal system and in the context generally of history, and the history of race in the United States anyway, you see the child support system, our system of setting child support orders that are too high and then enforcing missed payments or child support debt payments with incredibly punitive punishments, right? Or that's redundant, but severe punishments, as if in vengeance. I'm talking driver's license suspensions after 2 missed payments that are automatic and that then sort of debilitate a person from not only working, but picking up their kids from school, from spending time with their kids, cause them to maybe lose their income and their homes, but also jail. We'd arrest people for child support debt, either through the charges of abandonment, which is a criminal charge, or civil contempt of court, for which people can be held indefinitely until they pay a court-ordered purge amount, which, if they can't afford to pay, they're simply at the mercy of the judge at that point. But in the context of history and in the context of the criminal legal system, this system of child support enforcement is completely a new version of what white American society has done to poor Black families since people were kidnapped from sub-Saharan Africa. Ripping parents away from their children, children away from their parents, dividing families, causing tension and animosity between parents, and then blaming parents when they can't handle both the raising of their children and the imposed debt and punishments that the system puts on them. People are put in an impossible situation. And I think it's good to recognize that situation, this sort of cycle, which I go through. And the cycle is essentially, you get behind on child support because the order's too high, or because you lose a job or have a pay cut, then you have debt, then your license is suspended, then you lose your job entirely, then you have more debt, and you can't pay anymore. Maybe you lose even custody of your children. Then you're sent to jail for contempt of court because you're behind on debt, and you're stuck in jail. Finally, the judge lets you out. Maybe your community and family have mortgaged their homes again and given you a loan, or giving you out of jail by paying that purge order. But now you still have that debt, and you don't have a license, and you don't have a job, and that threat remains of jail. That cycle is an important thing to remember. How do we bring about healing instead of that? But I don't think we can bring about healing until we also recognize that that is part of a system of separating and destroying Black and poor families. And it's economic and social, and it's spiritual too. Because when we do that to a parent and we do that to a child, we affect their deepest and most important relationships. We affect their power, their freedom, their ability to see themselves as people capable of growing up and changing their situations as well as changing their communities. We try and attack that. And we're not thinking about that. We're just thinking about the stereotypes. We're thinking not at all about anything, just the system and the process. But that's what we're doing. That's what the child support system is doing. And we've got to think about ways, like Bruce has done, of how do we create court systems that actually solve problems and bring about healing and restoration, but also how do we address this deep racism and violence that's in not only the criminal legal system, but the civil legal system in the United States as well, the family law system. And Anne, I think, has a lot of direct experience trying to address that. So, Anne, I'll give it to you.
Hi. So with Victoria Chase, who's also on this call, I teach a clinic in which our students work with returning citizens on their child support issues. So this last year, our clients were ending a period of state incarceration, and they were in halfway houses when our students met them and worked with them. And Caroline Gallagher, who's on this call, is one of the students from that class. Our program, we worked with 13 students and with 6 clients. So it's, in terms of its practical effect on anybody's child support problems, it's really minimal. Although we were helpful to those people, what we were doing was providing advice and counsel. We were not representing them in court. We were helping them fill out paperwork, but we were able to help them organize the information of their lives and put it together as a narrative that we could make a certification for them that they could submit to the court so that their story would be understood in a way that just filling out the paperwork would not put their story across in the most positive light. And one of the things we found, 5 of our clients were in this category. 1 client was a disabled veteran. The people who were the returning citizens had really remarkable stories to share with us that we got to learn about their careers as fathers and their experiences as parents. And many of them were wanting to file other kinds of claims about being able to resume access to their kids. They had teenage kids and they wanted to be able to have a phone number so that they could start trying to repair a relationship. So we were addressing those kinds of issues as well as their child support matters. We don't know, of course, what the family court judges will do with paperwork, partly because the courts of New Jersey, like many places, are completely slowed down and are operating on Zoom and only dealing with emergency matters. So we won't actually know what the courts do with what we provided them, what the clients provided them. What I wanted to highlight about this are a couple of things. One of them is I'm somebody who has taught family law for decades, and I was familiar with some of the issues about the child support system, but in regular engagement that law students have with family law, the issues of family law and the poor are shoved to the margin and are not really addressed. And to the extent that child support is addressed, people are introduced to the child support enforcement system as if it were an appropriate system. People are not taught about the child welfare system either in mainstream family law courses. So there's a huge process in which we are training people who we are telling them that they're experts in family law, or they're beginning to become knowledgeable of family law, and they don't know anything about how the family law is impacting people who are of low wealth or who are poor, and largely Black and brown people. So that having family law in law school where students will be exposed to these other experiences and these other dimensions, I think is a critical step that anybody who's involved with legal education, we can begin to promote it. The second thing is that what I found for myself was that one of the major effects of this was to lead me to recognize and to explode stereotypes that I was carrying without really being conscious of them, in which poor dads were either innocent victims of oppressive systems, or they were bad guys who weren't taking care of their kids or who deserved to have been incarcerated for whatever crimes they committed. And in neither of those stereotypes did the fathers get to be people and did a sense of what their life narratives were like and what their experiences were like. And I think that one of the, Ross spoke very well about the, and with Bruce talking about how, even though Bruce says the system was designed with good intent, I don't really believe that. I think that the system was always about demonizing poor people and about attacking the possibility of a social safety net and blaming people individually for their situation, and enforcing, shifting a focus from social responsibility for the well-being of children and families to individualized blame of particular parents. And I think the child welfare system and the child support system, highly gendered, both carry this work out. And people in general don't even know that the money mainly doesn't go to the mothers, that the money mainly goes to the state. So people don't have any idea what it's like to have the state come in and define and organize your family life and your relations, particularly for two people who had sex and had a kid that they may not have intended to have, and they don't have an ongoing relationship, they don't have a family life, and the state identifies particular individuals and said, these are your responsibilities and we're going to enforce them on you in an extremely draconian way with very destructive effects. The surveillance that's involved in the child support system, forcing mothers to cooperate in paternity identification of men that they may not want to have any relationship with. And also the child welfare system and the surveillance that it has of these relationships of poor people and their kids mean that the state involvement in poor communities through the family law system is probably, if anything, greater than the direct involvement of the criminal justice system, and as Ross has talked about, is linked to the criminal justice system and its operation. Many of the men who have been killed in encounters with police where they turned and ran away, or that's what the police say happened, were people who were worried about encounters with the police because they had warrants out for them because of child support debt, or because of driving without a license, which is what happens when your license is suspended and you can't stop driving because that won't work in your life. So there's actually a direct connection between this child support system and the actual murder of poor Black people. But I also think that I'm really interested in how we can create a context in which people of reasonable goodwill might be able to become aware of what's going on, and we might have a national movement to make change. Because one of the things I think many people who don't do family law don't realize is that it is federal policy which creates some of the biggest obstacles to any kind of positive development. The requirement for driver's license suspension is a federal requirement that's a condition for states getting child welfare money. The requirement of certain kinds of other enforcement come from the federal government. The fact that as soon as your child support is due, it is no longer modifiable, so that your debt accumulates at an extremely rapid rate. and the system for determining the amount of awards and imputing income is all tied in with federal policy, so that it's not possible in a locality or in a state to reform the system. One can do the kinds of things that Bruce talked about, but these do not change the overall operation of the system in terms of people getting trapped in a cycle of debt and despair if they don't have jobs, or if they become incarcerated for some other reason and are not able to pay their child support. And most states don't even have a way that you can suspend your obligations while you're incarcerated. New Jersey has a motion that people can file to possibly suspend their child support while they're incarcerated, but nobody knows about it. Almost no motions are filed. Family judges don't deal with criminal law issues, and criminal law lawyers don't deal with family law issues. So the ways our legal system operates in terms of silos of poor people's family law separated from other family law, the family law system is separated from the criminal law system, and the child welfare system is separated from regular custody proceedings. This is a whole system which is designed to justify the oppression of poor families and poor parents in the name of saving and helping the children, which it completely doesn't do. So I'm extremely intrigued by the challenge of being able to change public consciousness about this, because my experience is that as a relatively progressive person, it took my direct encounter with these guys and with my students working on the system before I even understood what was going on. And so that means that it's a really fundamental challenge that we have to address. So that's what I have to say.
Thank you, Bruce, Ross, Anne, for wonderful presentations. A lot of food for thought in there. And I'll just open it up. I think Peter had his hand raised. So maybe Peter, if you want to kick off the dialogue, go ahead.
First of all, I thought that was fantastic presentation by the three of you. So many levels of reality were presented about. I took family law when I was in law school. I learned nothing about anything that you guys have just discussed. Not a thing about it, about the role of the court process, about the generation of stereotypes, about the punitive circular process of oppression that is lived out through this family law dynamic. I just thought the presentations were great. So I just want to say that. And I think, you know, with this big question now of what can we do in response to racial, the implicit racial oppression within the system, you know, maybe PieSlap should take this on somehow as a project, because it perfectly captures something that is so racially constructed to make the current situation of people unchangeable and inherently oppressive, that if, you know, trying to come forward with something like what Bruce has imagined and practiced in Minneapolis and figure out how to make it happen in Atlanta or Camden or elsewhere, you know, that's a great project. I just want to ask Bruce, how did you deal with these endemic problems that Ross and Anne have just illuminated, in the sense that, I mean, you altered the whole process, transformed the whole court process, transformed all the stereotypes, approached the situation in a completely different way. But how did you deal with the pressure of, say, federal requirements for suspending driver's licenses, for getting the money out of the dads, which, you know, for reimbursement to the state, all the things that were brought up in the other presentations? You created on top of it a beautiful humanistic co-parenting model, but what about how did you cope with the nuts and bolts of what is demanded of the states through this child support process?
I'll answer your question, but I'd also at some point like to hear one more minute from Ross. He talked a lot about big picture, but he's also been in court trying to deal with judges on child support matters and child support arrears and modifications. I hope we can get one more minute from Ross at some point. But the answer, Peter, is I think we had some advantages that Ann in New Jersey doesn't have. For example, Minnesota is one of about 3 or 4 states that's pretty much eliminated the revenue recapture requirement.
I see.
In other words, Minnesota pays you got to pay the federal government for the public assistance, but they pay it, and the vast majority of the money goes to the mother. And for the government to take it is a soul killer for fathers, because they've been doing these things like doing childcare and bringing stuff over when they can, and when they're working they pay, and all of a sudden that means nothing, and the state takes the money and doesn't even give it to the mother. So that's soul killing. The other thing is we had the buy-in of our child support agency from early on. I mean, I will say I worked hard at it, but they were very, like I say, people knew it was a bad system. And Ann is right to say it's oppressive, but there's a lot of people who are working to change it. I can tell you about reform efforts besides ours at the federal level. Vicki Turetsky was the child support enforcement director that we worked with. She was all in favor of what we were doing, the federal. And they were not using their enforcement mechanisms. They suspended all enforcement activities while people were in co-parent court. No driver's license suspensions. They would hold off on establishing child support. If we were trying to get people employed, we'll say we'll have something for you in a few months. So I think we had some institutional advantages that Ann didn't have. And I think I'll leave it at that, except to just reaffirm that there's a lot of people who know the system is bad, and there's a lot of people trying to make it better. So it's not quite a totally negative picture.
I want to just chime in something here, which is that Bruce's project that he described was part of a national set of demonstration projects in about 10 different states. And there periodically are some of these things that happen. And the federal politics, which focus on the bottom line is, does this expenditure of money and energy and effort increase significantly the amount of child support we recover? Yeah. And what happens is then the demonstration project and the funding runs out and the program is over and it's not followed up. So that finding a way that we can build from these positive efforts and learn from them and then actually implement them instead of having a one grant at a time, one demonstration at a project mindset. And so that we could institutionalize some of the flexibility that was available within the context of a demonstration project that then is not available more generally. And then the larger politics sort of swoops back in and wipes out, or, shuts down the potential.
Ross, did you want to add something about your practice experience, or should we hold you for a later point?
Sure, I didn't say much about that. I will say that, yeah, under Vicki Turetsky, who led the Federal Office of Child Support Enforcement, the Federal Office of Child Enforcement did promulgate some really, really good guidelines for states, recommended guidelines for states to follow, or sometimes, required guidelines for states to follow, although the carrot and stick is just like a sort of banal and not likely to be in threat of funding withholding. But the Trump administration came in and have a different set of mindsets, and there's not those reform efforts happening now on the federal level. But but what I've done in my actual project and my daily work is to try to get Georgia to implement some of those federal guidelines that have recently been, or that were in 2017, were instituted. And that means applying for modifications for people who are incarcerated or who have criminal records and have struggled to get employment because of those criminal records, trying to modify orders to make them more accurate, because more accurate orders, even if they're lower, result in higher payments long-term, and a host of other good things, but also higher payments. And then I'm defending people who are facing jail because of child support debt, and I'm working on policy. I've organized a working group in Georgia to try to expand programs like accountability courts or problem-solving courts for parents, which are not perfect here at all, but are better than jail, and to address driver's license suspensions. So we're trying to do policy work that would make a big difference in people's lives. And but I would say that my feeling about this is similar to my feeling about protests and changes to the criminal legal system. And that's that policy changes, individual policy changes are incredibly important and can be beneficial. But ultimately, we're building a movement that I think what Anne said it, right? Expand consciousness or elevate consciousness about these issues. And to humanize people who have been dehumanized by our society and by these systems. Policy change here and a policy change there will be helpful, but will not change the fundamental system or situation poor families, or mostly Black families, are in, unless there's a awakening in the American public to the humanity of these people, to the humanity of people facing support punishments, the humanity of poor parents and parents of color who are trying desperately to deal with poverty and trying desperately to raise children in a very dangerous and scary world. And at the same time, instead of getting support from governments and from public systems, are facing jail time, are facing cages, are facing arrest. Walter Scott is the most famous example of what Anne Freeman is talking about, the people running away from police and getting shot in the back. And Walter Scott was, that was in North or South Carolina, if you all remember, a few years back. And he got shot multiple times in the back. He was running away because he had child support debt. But what brings a person to feel like they can't even encounter and talk to this police officer because that's much of a threat that child support debt is to their lives, that they have to run away and potentially risk their life even more. That's deep. It goes deep. And ultimately, the movement, I think, needs to raise people's consciousness about these issues and these people.
Can I just follow up with one comment to that, which is the thing that you don't say is that you are working in a law firm, the Georgia Justice Project. You are a lawyer in a law firm whose core intention is to bring people into the community of the law firm itself so that they experience dignity, compassion, empathy, surrounded in a spirit of community to solve these problems. So their only venue for identity is not the violence of the courtroom. They have a competing arena that you guys are creating that is helping to do what you're talking about. And that's what we are trying to make happen in this organization, is to support creation of law firms that do that have that ethic and consciousness transformation in the way they deal with people. Okay, I'm done.
So I want to open it up to, sorry.
Go ahead.
To other folks who may have either reflections or questions. Of course, we have Victoria and Caroline who are actually part of this work as well. Please feel free to share any impressions or thoughts you'd like to, and just wanted to open up to the whole community. I have a question, but I'm going to hold it for a moment.
So
All right.
I'll chime in I just want to mention that as so the other clinic that I work with is a clinic that focuses on domestic violence and sexual assault. And so it's been incredibly interesting for me to be involved on two different sides of narratives that define polarities around gender. So while we're pursuing some of these changes, it's important to remember that there's another side of this. There's yet another side of the narrative that we're not discussing here, which is for moms. And so when I think about this problem, one of the most significant things that I think we could change that would make a tremendous difference is stopping state intervention in the form of requiring or taking on the identity of the filer and taking it entirely out of the hands of the family when there's a need for some kind of state support for the family. That to me totally obliterates whether it's the choice of the custodial parent at all, and also hinders the ability of the two parents to communicate and have any relationship at all around the question of finances. So I think in terms of baby steps, like I understand that the world right now is about big, momentous, ideas and changes, and I support that. I also know that having worked with, because I've done a lot of, beyond just what Ann and I have done this, in this class we've co-taught, I've appeared in a lot of these cases, and I've appeared on both sides, and I've appeared with the dads, and I've appeared with the moms, and I know what it means to raise the child without any financial support. So I think we have to make room for that here too in any of our thoughts. That's it.
I just want to say, I love what you just said, Victoria. That would enable a mother who is very satisfied with a father's in-kind contributions to say this will satisfy his child support obligation if he does these things, rather than the state saying only a monthly payment matters. So I love that idea, and that is an obstacle.
So maybe I'll just share my thought now as well, which was along the lines of what Victoria has raised. So I've also worked in this field somewhat for many years. Family law is one of my areas. And I've always been troubled by these child support issues that everyone has been talking about. The piece that Bruce and Ann and Ross focused on is where the state is involved. So families are receiving, public assistance or other benefits from the state, and the state seeks to recoup it. The other side of that, of the dilemma, is the cases involving parents, low-income parents who are directly in court themselves, where there's no state support, and the mother is seeking support from the father, and the same draconian penalties that we were talking about apply here. And to me, those cases are very hard because, as Victoria raised, there is a question of families having enough support. But on the other hand, I guess it raises for me the question is, what is the social support for human beings in our culture? Shouldn't we have much more of an infrastructure, of a minimum income, of some way for people to live, so that they're not in the position of, because it's sort of framed as, women's rights or just gender rights against men's, it becomes a very divisive issue if you're just looking at, are you supporting women or are you supporting men here? Although obviously there's people in different positions with men having custody and others not. But I think if we can look at it from a different framework, the same issue, I think, brings about potential for more holistic and healing responses and more just responses, which is, our society having a different level of support for families so that mothers aren't in the position, or fathers who have custody aren't in the position of really trying to, enforce those rules in very draconian ways because they haven't been receiving support that they're depending on because they don't have other resources. So it's a tricky issue. I just was wondering whether any of our speakers had further thoughts on that or anyone else.
Yeah, I think that's really well said, Nanette, and I would like to hear more from you, Victoria, and really from everybody on this call, either here or later outside if you all want to talk. But I think it's a real danger in my view, and in my sort of brief experience in doing this work over the past 2 years, that it does become a question of like father's rights versus mother's rights, or women's rights versus custodial parents versus non-custodial parents, and we're all imposing the father on the non-custodial parent and the mother on the custodial parent. And that's really problematic because it hurts everybody when a parent goes to jail and because they're poor. Because they can't afford to pay a child support. It hurts the parent who's in jail, it hurts the parent who's not in jail because they don't get assistance, and it hurts the kid who doesn't have their father or mother in their life or has to see them through like a glass panel. So I think that's why I put it in the context of racism and slavery and black codes and Jim Crow, because what white American society has been doing to black families is to break them up, pit them against each other and oppress them, to take away their power and the power of the community, to take away their ability to support one another. And so getting this fight of like, it's the parents between each other. And I think that's what we've done with legal aid for years, in that we're choosing to represent just one side and kind of ignoring the plight of the person who goes to jail, or maybe even using jail as a tool that we think is going to vindicate our client custodial parents' rights. And of course we want to help custodial parents, particularly mothers who have children with them and are struggling. But gosh, can't we do that in a way that is healing and restorative and empowering to the family as a whole, and that enables Black and brown communities to gain power and to gain a sense of restoration?
So
yeah, but I'd love to hear more about that, because that's
I just want to toss in the fact that as long as we're bringing on every possible big issue, that we need to recognize how much this has to do with our capitalism and our labor structure. Because the idea of forcing people to take unsafe, underpaid, demeaning, low-wage jobs, either women who receive welfare benefits who are forced into the labor market without adequate childcare, or the dads who are forced to take whatever job is available because the state will come after them if they don't take those jobs. We really need to understand that that's one of the dimensions of what's going on here. And that's one of the reasons why we don't have more of a social safety net, because we need a supply of labor power. I mean, the corporate system, the economic system is organized in such a way that coercion of people into work and into these roles, and then being able to stigmatize people who don't take these jobs, that you're a deadbeat dad if you aren't willing to participate or do everything you can, or when you do everything you can, if it's not enough money. So it's, yeah, I mean, there's that.
Hi.
Go ahead, SY.
Yeah, thank you. Let me say hello to you, Peter. How you doing, Peter?
I'm fine, SY.
I miss you.
Yeah, absolutely. Me too.
Well, listen, I think that the first thing we need to do is to follow through with the written statement in response to, is it something that should be done as a group? I think it's clear that Black families and families that are in poverty and oppressed and feel that they do not have a voice would appreciate the support, knowing that we have systematic evidence that there's a desire to breach the family in terms of letting them provide full emotional, financial, and social support to the child. So I would love to work with someone who's willing to at least begin with that statement and to get that out as soon as possible, and then to explore other options that would be useful. I have clearly found the use of mediation as a way of creating co-parenting agreements to be very supported and effective, and judges that are willing to work with that. So that's why I wanted to hear more of what Bruce had to say, not Bruce, of what Ross had to say about working with the judges, because I didn't quite hear how his interaction with the judges went. If they were receptive, or if they were reluctant, or they wanted to hold fast, hardcore to the rules. Thank you. Peter, call me. I got to tell you all about my son. He just finished his BS with psychology, and I got to hear
Okay,
my baby.
congratulations. You got to hear about Sam the rapper. my
Oh,
son.
yes, I do.
Listen, just one quick comment, which is SY, if you and Ross would get together in Atlanta, where you both are, you could help us develop this statement or the position we ought to be taking. So you know the Georgia Justice Project. Why don't you guys meet if you can and help us
I'd be
take the
happy.
initiative on that?
I'd be happy to do that, but I just got back in Georgia. I've been in New York for a long time, and then my
Okay.
oldest son is in
You're
San
back.
Francisco now, so I'm trying to
Okay.
get out there.
Okay, great.
Put the number in the thing for me.
Okay.
Okay.
And,
Thank you, sorry, everybody.
Thank you, SY. And thank you, Kim, for the offer. Dr. Param, I think we'll make you the last comment. And
Oh yeah, thanks a lot. My approach to the whole issue is, yes, state legal system, state and all that. I feel that it's not state's responsibility, it is state's duty. And how I see it is that, yes, social support is required, economic support is required, healing is required, but much more than that is the spiritual support in terms of how to make the people and the process who are involved in the legal system, as well as in the system which operates that particular processes in the litigation or understanding of it, to make those people understand the sincerity or the level of consciousness with which they can identify each and every one. Which means, unless and until the people who are working in the processes of the state and its legal system, unless and until they have experienced a state of consciousness in which the sense of oneness is automatic and natural, they will not be able to do anything. My experience is that. So I always stress upon what I call capacity building for people who are involved in these key processes. It's not about thinking, or it's not about doing a thing, changing the external structure. Fine, we can do that, nothing wrong in that. Unless and until a radical transformation takes place in the awareness of the human being who is going to deal with these issues, nothing is going to change. So I feel that my work, which I do, is only to give the training to people involved in state in terms of legal system, processes, judges, public prosecutors, is to make them understand that there is a consciousness, there is an awareness in which the empathy is automatic, empathy is natural. If that can be taken up and a kind of a program can be made, we can accelerate the process, as a result of which we can even reduce and even we can prevent these kind of crimes taking place. This is my view.
I have to say, Doctor, I have struggled with these many issues for a lot of years. And I have come to the same conclusion you have, is that the problems are always intractable until people's consciousness changes, which is why I'm trying to teach law students about mindfulness. So thank you for that comment.
Yeah, thank you.
thank you. So I just want to really I think we could have stayed on a lot longer. And thank you so much for folks for giving us a little bit of extra time today. Much appreciation to Bruce, to Anne, to Ross, not only for their presentation, but which was magnificent, but for your work. We really appreciate it. I did tape the event, your talk, and so I'll send it out to the PieSlap community, and feel free to use it in your work if it would be helpful to you. So much appreciation to everyone, and we'll be in touch about our next PieSlap call. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Thank you.